Hi, this is Guy Burgess. I'd like to welcome you to the second part of the Moving Beyond Intractability Conflict Frontiers online seminar. This part of the seminar is going to be devoted to an exhaustive look at an idea that we call massively parallel peacebuilding. As you may remember from the first part of the seminar, we spent a great deal of time arguing that intractable conflict constitutes the most serious threat to humanity. The truth is that a wide range of conflict problems are preventing us from solving pretty much all of our other problems. The truth is that we've dug ourselves into a very deep hole with our destructive conflict handling practices. It's actually gotten so bad that it's now unclear whether our children will live in a democracy or an anocracy, kind of a fancy word for anarchy, or some form of autocracy or tyranny. It used to be pretty much unthinkable. And there's a very real possibility that the tensions that we're not able to handle will escalate into some sort of catastrophic war. Now, we had thought that the arc of history was bending towards some sort of democratic ideal. In this sense, we didn't mean democracy as it is or as it has been, but rather democracy as it could be. That is, a government that truly is of the people, by the people, and for the people. But it now is starting to look like the arc of history may be bending toward autocracy or maybe just anarchy. Trust in government in the United States has collapsed from a high in the Johnson administration of around 80% down to around 20% now. And the truth is that any reasonable observer of government in Washington can't have much confidence that it's doing the right thing. So we have to fix it. It's not just having faith in it. It's also true that there's internationally, there's declining commitment to democracy. This study from the Pew Research Center documents increasing support for non-democratic systems of governance around the world, whether it's ruled by experts or strong leaders or the military. And they all sort of imply this belief in the myth of the benevolent strongman. I'm really worried about this because Lord Acton was right. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. Another challenge facing democracy and systems of power with governance, is that they are under attack by those who seek power over others. This is Philip of Macedonia, who, at least according to Wikipedia, is credited as developing the divide and conquer approach to oppressing others. And right now we've got a high-tech version of this, and lots of factions are out there trying to divide us and make democracy not work so they can, in some sense, profit off the chaos. Now, dystopian futures are becoming a real possibility. There's some sort of high-tech version of George Orwell's 1984 that uses the sophisticated information technology that we have today in the global web of social networks and the manipulation of those networks. There's also the very real possibility that our inability to deal with practical problems like climate change or infectious disease or management of the global financial system, any one of a number of sort of basic governance issues, could lead to pretty widespread chaos and collapse. And there's also the very real possibility that all of these tensions will somehow come together in a perfect storm. Collective security agreements that have been preventing large-scale war seem to be rapidly eroding. And we could easily have a war with weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, biological, or a whole range of new possibilities, or even horrific wars using old-fashioned weapons, like we saw in the genocide in Rwanda. So we've been trying to figure out how to get out of this mess. And we put together what we think is a realistic, but certainly a demanding strategy that we call massively parallel peacebuilding. And it's based on a scale and complexity oriented approach. And there are earlier posts in this seminar series that explain what we mean by this. And so we're trying to figure out, okay, how can we really come to grips with, first of all, the sheer scale of contemporary society-wide conflict. And again, in an earlier post, we talked about the order of magnitude problem. Most conflict interventions are what we call table-oriented. They're designed to build trust and collaborate among people who can talk to each other. But society-wide conflicts involve millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people. So we need to figure out how to scale up small-scale conflict handling techniques to society-wide levels. And to give you a sense of the magnitude of the challenge, the difference between conventional and nuclear explosions was 4 orders of magnitude. We're talking like something like 6 orders of magnitude in the difference between table-oriented and societally oriented conflict intervention practices. Another problem that we've got to deal with is society is composed of multitudes of independent actors that don't do what other folks tell them. And they're all trying to maximize their self-interest at the same time. It's kind of like playing pool and trying to make the perfect shot when there are millions of balls and everybody's trying to make the perfect shot at the same time. There's also the psychological complexity issue. We talk in earlier posts about how the human mind is not a spreadsheet that doesn't do a bunch of calculations and figure out the costs and benefits and say, aha, that's what I'm going to do. But it actually has a very complex array of cognitive biases, some of which are perverse and pathological, others are insightful and very useful. But we've got to build a process for dealing with conflict that recognizes the way people actually think and gets around this simple rational model. So the big question, how might massively parallel peacebuilding protect and advance democracy in the context of complex, very large scale and very intractable conflict? And the approach that we take starts by shifting from the engineering model. And this again is something we talk about in an earlier post, where you have some sort of comprehensive, centrally controlled, engineered solution where somebody works out the great strategy and all the dominoes fall into place and everything works out great. And instead focus on a medical model, which is much more appropriate for complex organic systems. And here what we try to do is to identify particular things that are going wrong, pathologies, use a very decentralized process to try to address as many of those as possible. Now, the massively parallel idea comes from massively parallel computing. And here, and this is what runs this unbelievably sophisticated array of communications and computer technology at the moment, is not a super smart computer, but it's actually a whole lot of sort of normal garden variety computers. In fact, some of the big server farms use cell phone processors. The thing is that they use them in a massively parallel way, where they all pick up part of the problem and work on it, but wind up working in a way that's mutually reinforcing. What we need to do is to get lots of people to work on the conflict problem in a massively parallel way and with the kind of can-do spirit that characterized our efforts to win in World War II, that has a lot, I think, to teach us. Another way of thinking about what we're trying to do with massively parallel peacebuilding goes back again to an earlier post where we talked about the Google traffic metaphor. And with Google traffic, they draw a map of traffic patterns around a city and they put little icons where there are problems, whether it's construction or accidents or whatever. What we do is we take that a step further, and you imagine making a map not of the highway system, but of the conflict system. and you imagine icons that are more than just accidents and construction, but places where new construction is needed, new technology. And you start to highlight all of the pathologies going back to the medical model where things are going wrong. And then what the key is to encourage people to adopt a problem within their sphere of influence where they can help address things. And the whole idea is to get lots and lots of different people working on different problems within the context of a larger community, and rather than having one guy come in on a white horse that saves everybody. And it's very much a grassroots emergent approach. Making all of this work is obviously going to be very, very difficult. But still, we don't have much of a choice. If we continue to let things go the way they are, we're in big trouble. It's a bit like a sailor trying to find his way into the harbor in a stormy and rocky coast. It's hard to do, but he doesn't have much of a choice if he wants to survive. And the sad fact is that's the sort of situation that we're in. So over the next many posts in the Conflict Frontiers seminar series, we're going to start looking at the details of what this massively parallel peace-building idea is and what it's going to take to make it succeed. One of the next posts in the series is going to look at the continuum between peace-building and democracy building and the relationship between these ideas, and how democracy building and rule of law and protection of human rights is the goal of efforts to promote peace. And war is sort of the antithesis of all of those things. The next thing that we're going to look at is a synthesis between this idea of peace building, which is something that outside interveners do to benefit another community, and constructive confrontation, which is something that the parties, the advocates on both sides of a conflict, do to handle their conflicts more constructively in ways that wind up serving their enlightened self-interest. We'll also have a post where we define in much more detail what exactly we mean by massively parallel peace building. There will be another post that argues that it's not really such a crazy idea. There are lots of precedents for this sort of approach to complex problems and pretty good track record of success. And then we're going to get into the details. And massively parallel peace building is built, go back to my Google map a few minutes ago. What we need to do is to start thinking about all the things that go wrong in a society's conflict system that needs somebody to help fix. So the core of massively parallel peace building is a series of action items where things that need to be done, and we group these in 10 broad challenge areas, and there are over 100 actions that are really needed. So that's where the massively comes in. There's an awful lot that it takes to address this problem. Another way of thinking about it is it's an all of the above approach rather than a pick one approach, because most of these problems we can't solve without dealing with all the different aspects. And then we're going to have a post on what we call second, third, and fourth order problems. All of the problems that arise that prevent you from solving the first order problems or making these action items actually work. And there are lots of capacity building kinds of issues that we're going to talk about. And then finally, and this is the biggest part of this part of the seminar, there will be individual posts ultimately, as we can get this together, on all of the 100+ ideas of things that people need to do, along with ways of trying to figure out which ones are best for you to do in a particular circumstance. We don't have all of this together yet. The truth is we need donations. We're pursuing this as quickly as possible, but if you can help support this, there's a donation page on the website. We really appreciate or would appreciate your assistance. And finally, this is why we call it the Conflict Frontiers Project. While we are building on a lot of great ideas that have been developed over the recent few decades of the peace-building field and the millennia in which people have struggled with conflict before that, there's still a lot of very new ideas here. And we welcome your thoughts. We don't promise to have it all worked out, but we've got some intriguing ways to start addressing the problems that are threatening our future and the future of our children and grandchildren.